I just saw people making real money on YouTube and thought, what if I could shoot guns and have the ammunition paid for by a video? That single casual thought became the unlikely origin of one of the most successful firearm channels ever built. Matt Carriker did not lose Demolition Ranch. He deliberately and thoughtfully outgrew it. For 14 remarkable years, he transformed a Texas shooting range into one of the most recognizable firearm channels in YouTube history, constructed multiple businesses around that foundation, survived repeated algorithm changes that destroyed other creators entirely, and watched millions of devoted fans become something he simply called the Demolition. Then, after one devastating national tragedy connected his brand to violence he never endorsed, one fundamental platform shift that threatened his entire back catalog, and one honest and quiet conversation with his wife at their kitchen table, he made the decision that absolutely nobody in his audience saw coming. The man who had built his entire identity and livelihood around destroying things finally and deliberately chose not to destroy his own life in the process. The Texas veterinarian who was never supposed to become a YouTube giant. Before Demolition Ranch became a sprawling YouTube empire touching multiple channels, physical businesses, and hundreds of acres of Texas real estate, Matt Carriker was simply a genuinely normal kid from the Texas Hill Country who grew up surrounded by animals, tight family bonds, and the kind of casual relationship with firearms that defines rural Texas life. He was born in 1986 and raised in Boerne, Texas, a small town positioned northwest of San Antonio, where the daily pace of life resembled nothing remotely close to the content machine he would eventually help define and dominate. His father, Dr. Lee Carriker, built his professional life as a practicing veterinarian, and that environment shaped Matt's fundamental worldview in ways that would only become fully visible years later. Growing up inside a veterinary household meant understanding medicine not as something glamorous or distant, but as something deeply practical and physically demanding. Long, exhausting days, injured and frightened animals, worried owners sitting in waiting rooms, and the constant steady discipline of showing up without hesitation when something living needed urgent help. That specific upbringing matters enormously because most people who discovered Matt through Demolition Ranch entirely missed the other deeply important half of his actual identity. The channel made him internationally famous for controlled and entertaining destruction. But his real professional career was always built around healing and repair. He attended Texas A&M's prestigious College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, one of the most respected veterinary programs in the entire country, and trained rigorously to earn his license as a practicing veterinarian. On one side of his developing life, he was immersed in anatomy, surgical techniques, complex diagnosis, and genuine animal care. On the completely opposite side, he was pointing a camera at firearms, salvaged equipment, bizarre targets, and the kind of infectious curiosity that always began with exactly one irresistible question. What actually happens if we try this? That fundamental contrast between destruction and healing is the real and often overlooked foundation of his entire story. Matt was never simply a gun content creator who happened to have a veterinary degree hanging somewhere on a wall. He was a trained and practicing veterinarian who understood YouTube's potential before most educated professionals had even seriously considered what the platform might eventually become. The channel that nearly cost him his professional future. In 2011, while still actively working toward completing his veterinary education and career, Matt quietly launched Demolition Ranch with minimal equipment, zero marketing strategy, and no realistic expectation that it would become anything beyond a personal hobby. One of his earliest videos, centered around firing a SPAS 12 shotgun directly into a computer monitor, perfectly captured the raw and chaotic spirit of the channel before any significant audience had arrived to appreciate it. The concept was straightforward, genuinely chaotic, and possessed an oddly charming quality that professional media consultants could never have deliberately engineered. There was absolutely no clear guarantee that any of it would develop into a sustainable career. YouTube itself was considerably younger and less commercially sophisticated. The infrastructure supporting individual creator businesses was far less developed than it would later become. And firearm content had not yet evolved into the complicated and politically sensitive algorithmic category that would eventually define and constrain it. But the channel began attracting viewers consistently, and consistent growth generates its own relentless pressure. Uploading gradually became something Matt could no longer handle casually between demanding veterinary school commitments. Real audiences were watching and expecting regular content. The experiments needed to become progressively larger and more impressive. The editing quality needed continuous improvement, and the upload schedule began directly competing with the professional future he had invested years of serious effort building. Rather than sacrificing his education for an internet wave that might not sustain itself, Matt made the decision to pause the channel entirely and finish his veterinary degree without compromise. He graduated, earned the title of Dr. Matt Carriker, returned to active veterinary practice, and only after establishing that professional foundation did he reopen Demolition Ranch to the public. That foundational decision permanently shaped everything that followed. Unlike the overwhelming majority of content creators who construct public fame long before they build any stable professional foundation beneath it, Matt entered the creator economy with a real and functioning career already established underneath the platform. If YouTube had disappeared entirely overnight, he was not empty-handed, panicked, or without options. He had an active clinic, a legitimate and valuable professional skill, and a complete life that existed entirely independently of any camera. How Demolition Ranch became the defining voice of GunTube. As the channel grew steadily through the early and mid-2010s, Matt discovered and refined the precise creative tone that would eventually make Demolition Ranch genuinely explode in popularity. He consistently made firearm content feel accessible, entertaining, and fundamentally non-threatening without ever reducing it to the kind of dry political commentary that dominated competing channels. The formula appeared deceptively simple from the outside. Genuinely unusual and creative tests, enormous and authentic emotional reactions, access to expensive and exotic equipment, elaborately constructed experimental setups, and the kind of pure infectious curiosity that viewers of virtually any background could immediately understand and appreciate. But the deeper reason the channel sustained its success across so many years was that Matt had developed an instinctive and rare ability to make destruction feel fundamentally friendly and safe to watch. He was never attempting to intimidate his audience or project tactical superiority. He was consistently trying to make people laugh out loud, ask interesting questions they had never considered, and come back eagerly for the next completely ridiculous and entertaining experiment. By the middle of the decade, Demolition Ranch had established itself as one of the genuinely defining channels within GunTube, the loosely connected online ecosystem of firearm creators, experienced reviewers, dedicated collectors, custom builders, and endlessly creative experimenters that had grown substantially alongside YouTube itself. What consistently separated Matt from the large and competitive field of firearm content creators was his deliberate refusal to become too specialized or narrow in his appeal. He was clearly knowledgeable about his subject matter, but never condescending or unnecessarily dry about sharing that knowledge. His entire on-screen personality was never constructed exclusively around being the most technically tactical or operationally experienced person available. He embraced being genuinely goofy, authentically self-aware, and surprisingly wholesome for someone whose primary content revolved around systematically destroying objects and pushing equipment to its absolute breaking point. That carefully maintained balance created enormous commercial appeal across a surprisingly wide demographic. Viewers who would never voluntarily sit through a dense technical firearms review could comfortably and enjoyably watch a Demolition Ranch video, because the core emotional hook was always simple universal curiosity rather than specialized instruction. Matt's fundamental creative genius was his ability to transform basic human curiosity into a completely repeatable and endlessly scalable content format that felt fresh and entertaining regardless of how many times viewers had seen the basic concept executed before. The complete empire operating behind the explosions. The most revealing aspect of Matt's story is that Demolition Ranch was never the complete picture. It was simply the loudest and most publicly visible piece of a considerably larger and more sophisticated ecosystem he was simultaneously constructing. Off the Ranch gave devoted fans genuine access to Matt's family life, ongoing personal projects, evolving home and property developments, business updates, and a substantially more personal and unfiltered version of the man behind the destruction. Vet Ranch applied the YouTube platform and its revenue generation capabilities directly to veterinary medicine, helping fund medical treatment for shelter animals that might otherwise have faced euthanasia due to cost alone. Bunker Branding, his merchandise and commercial screen printing operation, grew steadily from simple channel merchandise into a legitimate standalone business serving clients far beyond his own audience. And the Desperado Resort, an ambitious 350-acre property development in Bernie, eventually became one of his most significant and demanding real-world entrepreneurial investments. What casual viewers consistently missed was that Matt had quietly transformed himself from a content creator into a genuine business operator managing staff, inventory systems, customer service operations, active brand partnerships, warehouse logistics, substantial real estate holdings, complex tax obligations, demanding production schedules, constant legal considerations, and the unrelenting weight of audience expectation. Every successful video generated new maintenance requirements. Every fan purchasing merchandise became a customer within a functioning commercial operation. Every ambitious side project created new and non-negotiable demands on his finite personal time. Demolition Ranch was genuinely entertaining to consume as a viewer. But operating the complete system behind it for over 14 consecutive years was never simply fun. It was a sophisticated and demanding machine that required constant feeding, constant escalation, and constant energy to maintain at competitive levels. Vet Ranch, and what it revealed about who Matt actually was. Launched in 2014, Vet Ranch remains the single most important and revealing element of Matt's complete public story because it clearly demonstrated what he genuinely valued when the camera was not focused exclusively on entertaining spectacle. The channel used a combination of YouTube advertising revenue and direct viewer donations to fund real veterinary procedures for shelter animals, including ongoing collaborative work with San Antonio Pets Alive. The fundamental concept was beautifully simple and emotionally powerful in equal measure. Document the rescue and intake process. Film the actual medical procedure with honest transparency. Follow the animal through its complete recovery journey, and allow the resulting video to generate the revenue necessary to fund the next animal's treatment. It was YouTube's commercial infrastructure deliberately repurposed as a functioning medical funding mechanism. On Demolition Ranch, Matt consistently broke things for the purpose of entertainment. On Vet Ranch, he repaired living creatures for the purpose of survival. That powerful and genuine contrast made his overall public image substantially more resilient and emotionally durable over time because audiences could clearly see that the chaos and destruction were never the complete person. The compassionate veterinarian his father had helped shape was always present beneath the entertaining surface personality. The veterinary degree was never simply an insurance policy or a professional backup plan. It remained a genuine and active component of his real identity throughout his entire career as a content creator. The personal loss that fundamentally altered his relationship with time. In March 2020, Matt's brother Mark Carriker lost his battle with cancer and died. That loss deserves considerably more weight and attention than it typically receives in discussions of Matt's career trajectory, because grief does not simply create sadness. Grief fundamentally and permanently alters a person's relationship with time itself. A sibling carries knowledge of you that predates every audience, every revenue milestone, every brand partnership, and every camera. When that person is gone, the future contracts in ways that are impossible to fully articulate but impossible to ignore. As the years following Mark's death accumulated, the central question surrounding Demolition Ranch shifted quietly but unmistakably. It was no longer primarily about whether the channel could sustain its growth trajectory. It became increasingly about what that sustained growth was genuinely costing him in terms of irreplaceable time with his wife Meredith and their 3 children, Addie, Annie, and Lincoln. Fame possesses a remarkable ability to multiply money, expand available options, and amplify personal influence across large audiences. But it cannot manufacture or recover the specific years when children still actively want their father physically present and engaged in their daily lives. The platform that transformed beneath his feet. By 2024, YouTube's approach to firearm content had evolved into something fundamentally different from the relatively open environment Matt had entered in 2011. In June of that year, The platform implemented updated firearm policies that introduced age restrictions specifically targeting content involving automatic weapons, homemade firearm construction, high-capacity magazine use, and suppressor-related content. For a creator whose entire back catalog and established audience had been built on systematic firearm experimentation across all of those categories, age restriction functions as something far more consequential than a simple content label. Age-restricted content loses access to standard recommendation algorithms, experiences significantly reduced advertising revenue, and becomes substantially harder for new viewers to organically discover. For Matt, this meant the channel's future growth potential was genuinely and structurally compromised regardless of how loyal his existing audience remained or how creatively strong his future content might become. The platform that had originally enabled the construction of his entire empire was no longer operating by the same fundamental rules. The tragedy that dragged his brand into territory he never chose. In July 2024, during a presidential campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, a gunman attempted to assassinate former President Donald Trump. As images and video footage from the scene spread rapidly across global media platforms, viewers identified something Matt Carriker could never have anticipated or prevented. The shooter was wearing Demolition Ranch branded merchandise. No credible evidence emerged suggesting any personal connection, prior knowledge, financial relationship, or ideological alignment between Matt and the individual responsible. But association in the modern internet environment does not require logical foundation to generate immediate and serious reputational consequences. A brand can become permanently attached to a tragedy within seconds and completely independently of any actual relationship between them. Matt responded publicly, expressed genuine shock, clearly condemned the violence, and stated unambiguously that he had no knowledge of or connection to the individual involved. But no response strategy exists that fully resolves that specific kind of public moment. It demonstrated with brutal clarity how completely a creator can lose meaningful control over the cultural meaning and real-world trajectory of their own brand regardless of how carefully and consistently they have managed it across more than a decade of public activity. The quiet family conversation that made everything clear. Following the compounding pressures of platform policy changes and the devastating merchandise incident, the final and most personally significant factor arrived quietly and without drama. Matt and Meredith sat together and acknowledged directly what they had both been privately sensing for some time. Their children would not remain at home indefinitely. The specific window of time during which Addie, Annie, and Lincoln would actively want and need their father present and engaged in their daily lives was already closing, and no amount of additional revenue, subscriber growth, or brand expansion could reopen it once it passed. Matt did not walk away from Demolition Ranch because the channel had failed or lost its cultural relevance. He walked away precisely because it had succeeded so completely and so sustainably that continuing it required sacrificing things he had finally clearly identified as more valuable than any metric the platform could measure. Selling the physical ranch confirmed the permanence of his decision. When Matt announced in January 2025 that the Desperado Resort property was being listed for sale, the retirement transformed from an announcement into an undeniable reality. He was not simply reducing his upload frequency or taking an extended creative break. He was actively dismantling the physical infrastructure that had defined and enabled the entire creative era. The 350-acre property was not merely real estate. It was the tangible embodiment of everything the Demolition Ranch ecosystem had built and represented. Selling it communicated something that no video title or public statement could have conveyed with equal clarity. He was genuinely and permanently converting the accumulated weight of his empire back into time, personal freedom, and presence within his own family. What remained after the guns went quiet. Vet Ranch survived the retirement of Demolition Ranch and continues operating as the clearest and most honest signal of what Matt actually wanted to preserve and carry forward from his years as a creator. The veterinary work, the shelter animal rescue stories, and the transparent documentation of medical procedures funding themselves through audience engagement never required the same continuous escalation that Demolition Ranch demanded. It never had to become louder, more extreme, or more expensive every single production cycle. It connected directly and authentically back to the professional values his father had demonstrated throughout his entire childhood, and to the specific skills his years of formal education had developed. Demolition Ranch ended not because the audience disappeared or the passion completely exhausted itself. It ended because the man who built it finally made an honest and courageous accounting of what his remaining time was genuinely worth, compared everything the channel still required against everything his family still needed, and chose accordingly. The guns went quiet, not as a consequence of failure, but as the deliberate and considered decision of someone who had built enough, achieved enough, and finally recognized clearly that silence with his family was worth considerably more than another upload to an audience of millions.